weekly recap. It's Friday, February 13th, 2026, and tonight we'll be looking at 5 top stories that are going on here across the U.S., and we'll also look at some ongoing weather and sports, including a big storm system that is expected to move in this weekend across the Central Plains, and the Winter Olympics as they continue to occur all the way through next Sunday. We'll give you updates on who is in the lead with that. So all of that and much more coming up tonight on the weekly recap. Of course, as always, these are a little bit shorter than our normal weekly news, so just keep that in mind. And then also later tonight at really in just less than an hour, we will have our Friday the 13th special episode premiere during season 5 of the Great World Podcast. So you'll want to make sure to stay tuned for that as well. We'll go ahead and we'll dive into our top stories tonight, which include a partial U.S. government shutdown that is set to take into effect tomorrow. As early as tomorrow is when we're expecting this. This is expected to cause major airport delays. Of course, part of this has to do with the disagreement regarding ice. And so, again, this is a much smaller shutdown than what we have previously dealt with in the last several months. Of course, we covered a full government shutdown not that long ago that took place back this fall. Of course, there was also another partial government shutdown late January into the early part of February that got ended last Monday. And then now we're talking about the Department of Homeland Security is the department that is expected to go into that government shutdown. And this is going to be the second time that the Department of Homeland Security has been shut down. ICE operations are expected to continue to go on during this partial shutdown within the government, although operations could be a little bit limited. And then again, as we mentioned, airport delays could be expected during this time period as well. It's really all the news that we have on that. What we do know is that there really doesn't seem to be an end in sight to this upcoming partial government shutdown within that department. So we'll continue to provide updates on that. Hopefully we'll have new details by the time we get to the weekly update on Monday. Again, we do those every single week on Mondays. It's our GWP News Weekly segment. So now we'll go ahead and we've got a few other top stories that we're following tonight, including, of course, the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old who is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, who is, of course, the host on the morning NBC's Today show, was expected to be at the Olympics as well. And so this is now the 13th day that the search has been ongoing. The FBI now releasing new details on the person who was caught on the surveillance video around the time of her disappearance, describing the man as a 5'9" to a 5'10" tall with an average build. The other information is that we also know that he was carrying a 25-liter backpack from Ozark Trail. And so that was some of the new information that we have. We also know that the DNA that was recovered at the site where all of this took place, there was some DNA that was recovered. It is not Nancy Guthrie's. Okay, so that really I know that there was a lot of suspicion of whether or not that was the case. It turns out that that's not her DNA. So again, still not a whole lot of information other than that. That certainly is more information than we've had for quite some time. There still doesn't really appear to be a motive. Of course, at first it appeared that the motive was for money, that this person was simply doing it for money, because this is $1 million home, of course, and so that could have been one reason that this happened, and that certainly is still a possibility. But at this point in time, it appears that a lot of the ransom notes were people trying to take advantage of the situation and get some money off of the case. And so it's starting to appear that that was the case. Of course, some of the ransom notes have already been proven to be fake, and so that is, of course, a little bit of evidence of that. Again, still not a whole lot of information at this point in time, but as as we get new developments on that story, we will continue to provide updates. Of course, the body or the camera from the doorbell camera footage was, of course, the first footage of the disappearance that took place. Of course, during the weekly news on Monday, we talked about how there was a little bit of suspicion about the fact that the original theory or the original reason why it was noticed that she was missing is because she was not at church. That being said, it was then discovered that she had been going or had been listening to the online services. And so that kind of put a hole in that story as well. So a lot of questions surrounding that, in addition to the motive and, of course, the location of Nancy Guthrie as well. Of course, with some of the health issues as an 84-year-old that she was experiencing, it would be very difficult at this point to continue surviving depending on the state of where she may be being held at this point in time. Of course, the Guthrie family is still holding out hope that she may be still alive after 13 days of being missing at this point in time, with, of course, with the video footage with that as well. So that's what we know at this point in time. So, a couple of other stories that we don't really have a whole lot of information on these last two stories. They were just some other kind of interesting things that took place. This actually took place Wednesday into Thursday as well. We had two U.S. Navy ships that collided near South America in the Caribbean. And so the report was that there were some minor injuries that took place when this took place. We also know that, so what was happening is that the two ships were refueling, and so when that happened, they collided, and again, there were some minor injuries on Wednesday when this took place, and then the report came out on Thursday morning. So that was some news. And then one of the other big stories that we've been following as well was this morning, a 4-crew member of the NASA's SpaceX Crew 12 mission launched at 5:15 a.m. Eastern Time this morning at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Of course, this comes not that long after Artemis 2. That launch has been delayed until March, so not too long after that. Now, this 4-crew member of the NASA SpaceX crew has launched, so of course, that was some positive news. During the flight, SpaceX will monitor a series of automatic spacecraft maneuvers from its Mission Control Center in Hawthorne, California. So that is where it will be monitored from. That's it for news. We'll now move to Now we'll go ahead and we'll move into weather. We'll start off by looking at the national weather alerts here across the country here. You'll notice that things overall are pretty quiet here across the lower 48. A couple of fog advisories along the Gulf Coast and into the northern plains. We've got one into the state of California as well. But other than that, not a whole lot for us across the lower 48. Across the state of Alaska, things are a little bit more active as we do have that blizzard warning across the western part of the state, some cold weather advisories, and some other winter weather alerts are also in effect across that region. But the story has been pretty quiet overall on this Friday the 13th here as far as weather goes across the country. That will soon be changing into this weekend as a storm system is going to move here into the central plains, giving some chances for rain here across Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and into Missouri. So that's going to be starting later tonight into tomorrow. Temperatures will cool down a little bit tomorrow as a result of that across the state of Missouri as well. Further to our south, we're also going to be looking at the possibility for some severe thunderstorms. Not a huge risk. We're not really looking at the risk of a severe weather outbreak. That's not really a big concern at this point in time. But as you'll notice here, heavier rainfall expected. This is as of midnight on Sunday morning. This is from Tropical Tidbits showing that 12Z run of today, February 13th. So you'll notice the GFS, the American model, continuing to show heavier rain moving across the southeast. And then as we go into Monday, the storm system will begin to move out. Not a whole lot of winter weather is expected with this particular storm system. So looking a little bit closer at that severe weather risk, we do have that marginal risk. This is from the Storm Prediction Center showing their outlook for today for the potential of severe weather, looking at that marginal risk. That's a 1 out of 5 on their severe weather index scale here, that scale that they use, those categories here. And you'll notice that across western Texas, western Oklahoma, that's where the main risk is going to be for the potential for wind and also hail. Those are the main threats. Tornado, not really a huge risk for tornadoes for today. Now going into tomorrow, this risk rather is going to slide further towards the east, and that is going to leave eastern Texas and western Louisiana in a slight risk, 2 out of 5 on that severe weather index for severe thunderstorms. There is even that 5% outlook across southeastern Texas and western Louisiana for the potential for even some tornadoes in and around the Gulf Coast here. Winds and hail, strong gusty winds and large hail will also be at risk as we go into tomorrow as well. And then on Sunday, your Sunday severe weather outlook, your day 3 severe weather outlook from the Storm Prediction Center shows a marginal risk of severe weather from New Orleans going into the state of Florida, also going as far north as Birmingham, Alabama. So severe weather will be staying to our south, but that flood risk will be with us across the state of Missouri. You'll notice that we do have that marginal risk for flooding. This is for today from the Weather Prediction Center. That's where we're getting these graphics from. Western Texas all the way into southwestern Missouri under that marginal risk for flooding here. That 5% category is where we're at for the risk of flash flooding as we go into today. What about into tomorrow? The risk begins to increase across some of those same areas that are looking at that severe weather potential. The heavier rain can be just a little bit to the north of where that severe weather threat is expected to be, including places like Memphis under that slight risk for flooding. We're still looking at that 1 out of 4 risk for flooding, that marginal risk 5% across the state of Missouri, all the way up to Interstate 70 here, including Columbia, but also across the southwestern Missouri area, including Joplin and Nevada, under that risk for flooding as we go into Saturday. This will all move out of the region by the time we get into Sunday, but we are under that marginal risk for flash flooding for both Friday and Saturday, more so for Saturday, including a larger area of the state of Missouri. Looking at how much rainfall we're expected to see, of course, some of those heavier totals are going to be staying out towards the west, where we're going to be dealing with more atmospheric river events. We're going to be talking about that a little bit more on your Monday weekly news. Not going to touch on that a whole lot today, but you will notice that rainfall potential as we go through this weekend across the state of Missouri, likely being anywhere from 3/4 of an inch to 1.25 inches for most of us, with heavier totals of around 1.5 to 3.5 inches as we go across Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Texas as well. What about snowfall? Again, not a whole lot expected out of this storm system, really not any overall, but you'll notice that those heavier totals, this is through next weekend, showing some of those heavier totals across the higher elevations across the western U.S., and also seeing a couple of storm systems across the northern plains. We haven't really seen a whole lot of winter weather across this region in quite some time. As far as those hazardous outlooks, going from February 20th through the 26th, we have that slight risk for flooding across the west coast with those heavier precipitation rates expected. And then snowfall will also remain above average, potentially even hazardous across the northern plains from the 20th through the 22nd. Things will also stay active across the mountain ranges from the 20th through the 26th across the west. And then we even have that slight risk for winds as we go into next weekend across the central part of the U.S., including us here in Missouri. Now we'll move into sports. Now we'll go ahead and we'll move into sports. Of course, the Winter Olympics still ongoing here as those continue all the way through next Sunday, February 22nd. We'll go ahead and now that we're a week into the Olympics, we'll go ahead and we'll look at Who is leading right now? We'll look at the top five countries when it comes to the medals so far in the Olympics. We still have Norway and Italy that are tied for the number one spot. Norway technically has the number one spot because they've had more golds than Italy has. Norway has had 8 golds, 3 silvers, and 7 bronze to put them at 18 medals. Italy has had 6 gold, 3 silver, and 9 bronze, putting them in the number eight at 18 medals as well. So again, tied for the most medals. Then we go to the United States, where the United States is currently in third at this point in time with 4 gold medals, 7 silver, 3 bronze, and 14 medals total. France just a little bit behind that at 4 golds, 5 silvers, 1 bronze, currently putting them at a total of 10. Germany in the number five spot with 9 total medals, 4 gold, 3 silver, and 2 bronze is where we're currently at. Again, overall, there are nearly 2,900 athletes that are competing in the Olympics so far this year. There's 116 different events that are going to be taking place, and there's 92 nations that are competing this year. Again, the best way to, or where you can watch this, of course, is through NBC covering the Olympics, but also streaming on Peacock. That is where you can find all the coverage on the Winter Olympics. Again, it was a week ago that we had that opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics. Of course, you can also check out here on the Great World Podcast. We had a special episode that premiered last Friday that was all about the 2026 Winter Olympics. There was a bit of a debate that we did as well. We talked about some new events that they've added for this year's Olympics. So if you want to go ahead and check that out, you can always go under the Season 5 playlist here on the Great World Productions YouTube channel. So again, that was one of our latest episodes that we did. Of course, the day after that, we did an episode covering the Super Bowl special as well. Of course, you can also tune in tonight for our Friday the 13th special here on the Great World Productions as well. So that's it for that. We'll go ahead and we'll now look at the top 25 on the men's basketball side of things. The number one leader is still Arizona, although Arizona did lose on the road to Kansas. They will be facing Kansas, who is currently ranked number 9, later in their schedule, later this month. So we'll have to see if Arizona is able to get their redemption after having their first loss of the season. Michigan also has only had one loss. They're in the number 2 spot right now. They lost a game at home. They're on a 9-game win streak at this point in time. Houston at number 3, Duke number 4, Iowa State at number 5 as well. This is from the Associated Press's top 25 rankings there on the men's basketball. Of course, we are now just a couple of weeks away from those tournaments beginning in the month of March, which of course will lead us into the overall March Madness competition that will decide the winner here this year. Of course, we've got UConn that just had a recent loss, but they're still at the number 6 spot. Nebraska is number 7, Illinois 8. Of course, we talked about Kansas being at that number 9 spot. They've lost 5 games, but they've now won 8 in a row after their recent win against Arizona. Certainly, again, knocking off the number 1 team is certainly a really big feat for them. Michigan State in the number 10 spot as well. And then here's the rest of the list going from number 11 through 25. We've got North Carolina, Gonzaga, Purdue, Florida, Virginia, Texas Tech, St. John's, St. Louis, Vanderbilt, Clemson, Arkansas, BYU, Miami, Ohio, Louisville, and Kentucky. Of course, Miami, Ohio is pretty noticeable on that list because they are undefeated. They are the only team out of 300 teams, or just over 300 teams that compete in Division I in college men's basketball. They are the only team that is undefeated at this point in time at 24-0. So we'll have to see. They do have a bit of a tougher schedule over the next few weeks with a few games remaining this season. We'll have to see if they remain undefeated. Of course, as we did mention, we are just weeks away from the conference tournaments beginning. Just a couple of ones that we want to highlight. Of course, the ACC, that's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina this year. The Big 10, or the Big 12 rather, is going to be here in the state of Missouri in Kansas City. Both of those taking place between March 10th and the 14th. We've also got the Southeast Conference as well. That's going to be from March 11th through the 15th in Nashville. The Mountain West, March 11th through the 14th in Las Vegas. Of course, there's many other many other conferences as well that will be taking place during that time period. We've got 31 different conferences that are all going to be competing for 68 teams that will ultimately make it into the March Madness tournament. Just as a reminder, Selection Sunday is on March 15th. The first four takes place from March 17th and 18th, and then the first round of the March Madness playoffs for the men's side of things, that's going to begin on March 19th, all leading up to the championship game, which is going to be at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, Indiana. That game is going to be on April 6th, rather, on a Monday night. The Final Four will also take place there at Lucas Oil Stadium. That will be taking place the Saturday prior to that on April 4th. The rest of the games will take place during the month of March. So we'll not want to miss out on some of that action. We've got over 100 games in the men's college basketball side of things for tomorrow. So a lot of big matchups, including one that here in Columbia, Missouri, that we are really paying attention to, and that would be Texas versus Missouri. If you look at the playoff odds between both Texas and Missouri, it's pretty neck and neck between the two teams at this point in time. So certainly a big game going into this weekend that's going to be taking place. I'm actually going to be at that game, so I'll get to watch that live, but it certainly has really big playoff implications because at this point in time, Texas would not make the playoffs, but Missouri would. If Texas wins here at Mizzou this coming Saturday, that could result in Texas taking that spot that Missouri is currently in. So certainly a lot is at stake going into this weekend and in the weeks to come for college basketball. Well, that is pretty much all the time that we have for this week on our weekly recap. We'll see you back here next Monday.